F1's biggest tech controversy so far this season has involved the FIA's intervention on porpoising and a knock-on clampdown on Flexi floor tricks. Amid growing concerns from drivers at the start of the season about potentially safety implications of excessive bouncing, the FIA felt it had no option but to intervene in order to prevent the type of severe up and down movements that were commonplace in the opening part of the season. The FIA's main focus was on the introduction of an aerodynamic oscillation metric in order to limit the amount of porpoising and bouncing that the drivers were having to endure. However, the scope of that tool was expanded to include tougher measures on flexible floors and planks because the FIA felt they needed to be a level playing field among teams about how they were dealing with the phenomenon. The governing body measures, which were set out in a revised TD issued to be the teams at the British Grand Prix, will be introduced at the Belgian Grand Prix, having initially been scheduled for the French GP. While teams are saying inside the AOM metric will be something that they will need to be mindful of, it's a new Flexi floor clampdown that could pose bigger headaches up and down the pit lane. The Flexi floor intrigue mainly focused on the way that some teams have cleverly exploited grey areas of the rules to get more flexibility in their plank that runs underneath the cars. For those who are unaware, the plank sits below the central surface of the floor body and governs how low the car can run. Given its thickness, it must not be worn by more than 1mm, with its seat conformity check at the periphery of 6 precisely placed 50mm holes. Deflection is no more than 1mm is permissible when the car is supported at the 2 holes 1080mm behind the front axle line and 2mm at the rearmost hole while supporting 70mm pads on the FIA's test ring. Some teams are believed to have made use of the way the measurements were done with the car supported on weights to build a degree of movement to the way the plank was fitted to the car. When chanked with the car's weight pushing it down on the plank, the fixtures were fully compressed and so stiff enough to comply with the rules. But out on track and without nearly 800 kilograms pressing down, those materials expanded to allow a few millimetres more plank flexibility, enough for performance gains. F1 teams are also permitted to make use of machine flush mounted titanium skids in and around the plank holes in order to limit wear, of which there are enormous ancillary regulations governing the size, shapes and fixings. The skids are usually the reason as to why the see sparks from the underside of the car as they come into contact with the track surface. However, the plank itself will also be scorched by the friction that's involved, making the study of the wear patterns an interesting observational game in its own right. The previous generation of F1 cars saw most of the teams design cars without a significant amount of rake, with a nose down amount placing a premium on the front of the plank in terms of wear. This led on several occasions to the FIA creating a new criteria in order to combat any trickery that might have been resulting in performance advantage by teams flexing the plank in the area of the car to get the front of the car even lower to the ground. In much the same way, the FIA is now combating a change in approach for the latest generation of cars. Rather than high rake being the way to go with the 2022 ground effect machines, instead they need to be more stiffly sprung and run low and flat to the ground. As a consequence, they exhibit a different behaviour to their predecessors. Some teams are understood to have divided up the sections of the skid around the edge of the prescribed holes. Some of them are more flexible than the rest and move up and down when a load is applied. This is in order to, as the section comes into contact with the track surface, it retracts upwards, reducing wear compared with more stiffer areas. This ensures that at the end of the race, the movable section remains unworn to ensure that the team fully complies with the rules. Teams have been able to exploit these, having run different sections due to the pads that measure static flexion in the FIA scrutineering bay being 20mm larger in diameter than the holes. Therefore, any sectional differences in the surfaces are overlapped by the pad. In order to counteract this, the FIA's new technical directive stipulates that local stiffness around the periphery of the outside of the free holes, a radial distance of 50mm outside the periphery, must be uniform, with variance not exceeding 10%. Furthermore, Article 3.5.9e regarding wear of the plank is being expanded upon to, with compliance now required about 75% of the hole's periphery. Both of these measures will effectively outlaw movable skid block practices, so any team that has been doing well will now need to run their car in a different way. It may seem unfair for the governing body to make changes at the midpoint of the season, but in accordance with Article 3.15.1 of the tech regulations, the FIA reserves the right to introduce further load and deflection tests on any part of the bodywork which appears to be moving while the car is in motion. It remains seen if this will have a big effect on the picking order, but there are undoubtedly teams that will have to make modifications to fall in line and that may hinder their development paths they've been on and take them in new directions. This could also be a costly exercise, not only from a financial perspective, but also in terms of having to make a U-turn in terms of a development sense. But anyway guys, that's the video. Thanks very much for watching. Remember to like, share, subscribe, bonus thoughts, comments down below. For one, switch me for daily F1 news and subscribe to my channel on Instagram, and I'll be greatly appreciated. Thanks very much for watching. Peace!